Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, money and politics reporter, Kyle Khan-Mullins. Kyle, thanks for coming back on.
Always fantastic to be here, Brittany. Thanks for having me.
Big news from the Democratic ticket this week. Vice President Kamala Harris picked her running mate, and that running mate is Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. And in full Forbes fashion, you figured out his net worth. But before we dive into the numbers here and the finances, tell us, who is Tim Walz?
Like you said, Tim Walz is the governor of Minnesota. He wasn't actually born there, born in Nebraska. He's a former National Guardsman, former teacher. Served 6 terms in Congress in a sort of light red district, rural district, and then became the governor of Minnesota. So that is in very, very brief, his life story.
So let's make it a little less brief of a life story. Let's start with his teaching career as well as service in the military. Can you expand on those routes that he took a little bit for us?
Absolutely, and the two are kind of intertwined. So he enlisted in the National Guard when he was 17. His dad was a Korean War veteran, so he was kind of following in his footsteps. And it's super unclear as to exactly how many years he was on active duty versus reserve duty. That's kind of the nature of the game when you're in the National Guard. We have requested a service record, so we might have an update for you when we get those. But he was in between active and reserve duty for those first couple of years. He ended up going to college on the GI Bill in Nebraska. And then in another way, he was following his father's footsteps. He became an educator. And so he stayed on reserve in the National Guard and started to become a teacher. His first year teaching was actually in China. He was teaching English and history in southern China. And then for years afterwards, he would lead American students on educational trips to China as well. When he came back, became a teacher at a Nebraska school. That's where he actually met his wife. They shared a classroom. And then she was an English teacher. He was a history teacher at the time. And then they moved to Minnesota, which is where his wife was from, in 1996. When they were there, they bought a house. They, again, both teachers. He was also a football coach. He chaired the Gay Straight Alliance, which is pretty remarkable for the 90s. In Minnesota. And then in 2003, he was actually deployed as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. He was still in the National Guard at that point, and his unit was sent to Europe as part of the sort of U.S.'s global war on terror efforts. When he came back, he retired from both the military and teaching and ran for Congress.
Really just an incredible career arc, from essentially a high school football coach, teacher, to now vice presidential nominee. So let's get into the numbers here. How much is Forbes estimating he is worth, and how does that stack up to Vice President Kamala Harris, former President Donald Trump, and Senator J.D. Vance?
Forbes is estimating that Governor Tim Walz is worth about $1 million. Compared to his running mate, that's not very much. Kamala Harris is worth, we estimate, about $8 million. And then additionally, if you want to look at the other side, J.D. Vance, we're estimating is worth about $10 million from that best-selling book he wrote, Hillbilly Elegy, and venture fairly long career in venture capital. Donald Trump, of course, a billionaire, is worth, last I checked, about $4.8 billion. That fluctuates from day to day because of the stock price of his Twitter knockoff, Truth Social. So all of that put together makes Walz the least wealthy on the ticket of anyone on the major party tickets.
You cover the net worths of many political figures. Does anything strike you specifically and stand out about Walz's net worth?
I think the biggest thing is Walz's net worth is made up entirely of his pensions that he and his wife have accumulated over their many, many decades in public sector careers. They don't own any real estate. They actually sold their home in Minnesota when he became governor, because they moved into the governor's mansion. He doesn't own any, he doesn't appear to own any real stocks or other investment vehicles. Basically everything is just these retirement plans and pension plans from his various careers.
When he got elected to Congress in 2006, what did his finances look like then?
So his finances at the time, We saw those teaching pensions that both he and his wife owned. They did own a house at the time, and it was mortgaged, so they were a little bit more typical working class family at that point. They owned real estate, and they also reported some life insurance plans. But overall, his finances did not change that much. The big thing that getting elected to Congress did, there's really two things there. First is it gave him a huge salary bump. So reportedly, when he was first elected to Congress, he was in one of those orientation sessions they do with all the new members, and they were told, all the new members, that a lot of you are probably going to be taking pay cuts from your previous jobs as lawyers or businessmen. And reportedly, Walz turned to an aide and said, "This is 4 times more than I've ever made in my entire life." His salary at the time was about a little over $160,000. It reached over $170,000 by the time he left Congress. And that's a heck of a lot more than a public school teacher in Minnesota was used to making. And then the second thing is serving in Congress gave him access to a very, very valuable federal pension. And so that you have that very high salary base from his congressional job, combined with he's actually able to double dip into any active duty years that he had in the military. So that counts towards his years of service. So 12 years in Congress plus active duty, military service plus a high salary base, that pension is worth almost $500,000 in our estimation.
His pensions make up almost all of his fortune, you're reporting, but does he currently have any assets?
His pensions are his assets. That's kind of the way we're looking at his net worth right now. Theoretically, if he wanted to, he could turn around and sell those pensions to they have a present value tied to them based on their potential future payout. So that's kind of how that's how we value those pensions. With all of that said, he also, things are a little bit unclear. We don't have a really solid financial disclosure on him since 2019 when he left Congress. Minnesota's state disclosures are just not as open. There's just not as much stuff on them, not as much detail. So because of that, we don't have a great sense of how his finances have changed since 2019. Whether he and his wife have maybe bought assets that they don't have to disclose on those Minnesota disclosures.
Talk to us about those unanswered questions. What else do you have?
So in addition to that, we just don't know how much his finances have really changed since 2019. We don't have a great sense of it. The other big thing is that while he was in Congress for years, he and his wife both reported 2 pensions from teaching each. So total of 4 pensions tied to their time teaching. And the big unknown there is we don't know why they've reported 2 pensions. Some of them might also be annuities. They've been reported somewhat inconsistently over the years. That's not evidence of anything nefarious. These forms are not particularly well designed. So in our experience, politicians make mistakes on reporting assets on them all the time. But we're not 100% sure what was going on there, and the campaign didn't respond to our initial request for comment. With all that said, we should theoretically learn more about what his finances look like and get more details on those pensions or whatever financial instruments they end up being when he files as a vice presidential candidate. He has to file very detailed disclosures for that. However, because we're so close to the election at this point, theoretically, he could get extensions on filing those disclosures that carry him past November 5th, past the election. So we might not know. Now, of course, theoretically, he's supposed to file within 30 days. So ideally, he does that, and then we're able to, take a better look at his finances, but we don't know.
Despite all of these unknowns, you're reporting one thing that is for certain. If the Harris-Walz ticket wins the White House, Walz's financial picture will likely improve. Why is that?
In short, he's going to get a really big salary bump. He's making a little under $130,000 a year as the Minnesota governor right now, which is certainly a pretty good salary. But the vice president makes $235,000 a year. So he's going to make substantially more. That'll be an 80% pay bump. And then additionally, that will also raise the value of that federal pension we were talking about earlier, because it raises the salary base that the benefit is calculated from. So that's one way that his finances will presumably improve if he is elected to the vice presidential office. And then the second way is, I think we're going to talk a little bit about this, but vice presidents have a lot of ways to make money once they're out of office.
Yeah, you said that in your piece that he would be on the Mike Pence track. And if you look at Mike Pence's record compared to Governor Tim Walz's, politically, they're pretty different, but it seems like financially, you're saying that they could be going down the same road. How so?
Yeah, I was struck by some of the similarities here. So first off, again, like you said, not politically similar, but they're both, Mike Pence in 2016 versus Tim Walz today. They're both Midwestern governors who were chosen by for the vice presidential ticket by much wealthier presidential candidates from coastal states. And so, if that comparison holds financially, and I should say, they were both worth about $1 million at the time, and their net worth was made up almost entirely from pensions gotten in public service jobs. So, if that comparison holds for Walz going forward, that is a pretty good sign for him. Mike Pence was able to quadruple his net worth after leaving the vice presidency because of all of the various ways that politicians are able to make money after leaving office. They give speeches, they write books, they do consulting jobs. They have plenty of avenues to bring in lots and lots of money. So Mike Pence's net worth went from $1 million when he left office to about $4 million when he ran for president just 3 years later.
Kyle Khan-Mullins, per usual, I appreciate your reporting and the conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.